getting right into it here. My guest tonight, Dr. Rita Louise, her book is Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. And we're going to talk about evidence of extraterrestrial contact tonight, amongst other things. PhD, best-selling author, medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise is the host of Just Energy Radio and the founder of the Institute of Applied Energetics. She is the author of 3 books as well as hundreds of articles that have been published worldwide. She has appeared on radio and television and has spoken at conferences covering topics such as health and healing, ghosts, intuition, ancient mysteries, and the paranormal. And she's going to be joining us in just a moment. I want to read a real short insert in her book, and I think it'll give you a really good idea of where we're going tonight. The one great question that says for humanity has always been, where do we come from? Great minds have wrestled with this since the dawn of consciousness, and various theories have been produced, some enduring and others not. Science has certain ideas and religions others, but none are conclusive nor universally accepted. And with that, I'd like to welcome to Late Night in the Midlands, Dr. Rita Louise. Welcome aboard, Doctor.
Hey, Michael.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time out to be with us tonight. I do appreciate it.
Well, not a problem.
All right. Well, if we could, I guess let's start out a little bit. What got you so interested in this field? And tell me some about the book.
Okay. I mean, I've always been interested in ancient history, and, you know, my interest really kind of started off with as a child with an interest in archaeology, but as I move forward, I mean, the work that I do is I work as a psychic and a medical intuitive, and part of my, that path really took me through looking at ancient spiritual traditions. And so, I've always had this interest in, mythology and how it relates to spirituality, and then, history, and looking at history from a different perspective, not from what the history books say, but from what the texts are actually trying to tell you, from on a deeper level. And so that's really kind of what got me started in the concept of writing this book. And there's been a lot of TV shows that talk about ancient mysteries and, the whole Ancient Alien show. And that, and I'll say, that kind of spurred me on to dig a little deeper, because I felt like they would give you glimpses into things and touch on things, but not necessarily give you the full answer. And I always want deeper answers and more understanding, and not just, well, these guys said it too. It's like, okay, said what?
Right.
I want to know what they say, not that they just said it. So.
And so through your research and, looking so deep into this, what is your conclusion? I mean, the ancient aliens theory, I think, definitely holds some bearing, no doubt. There's just, and then there's the religious side of things. And I think more and more there's more evidence that is pointing towards some kind of extraterrestrial involvement at some point in our past.
Well, I mean, based on mythology, and the new book, Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods, really focuses just on mythology. And, my husband and I would get into he's the co-author. So I'm just going to say husband, Wayne La Liberty, the co-author. He and I would get into these heavy conversations. He would, throw in the pyramids and throw in these structures, and it's like, I'm not talking about architecture. I'm just talking strictly about mythology, because I feel like the mythology predates any of the architecture that we see on the planet. And based on the mythology, the way that it looks is that in our far remote past, and we're talking about before the planet was really formed, or was in the process of being formed, a group of extraterrestrials came to the Earth. And when I say a group, it's kind of hard to tell if we're talking about an individual group that had other races or other phenotypes of characters that were subservient to them, or if there was an originating race and then there were usurping other groups from other planetary systems that in the mythology became their children, became these associated groups, for good or bad, into this whole narrative of our history. But when you look at the mythology, you're really looking at 3 or 4 different characteristics and different genealogies of gods that come down to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're not all the sky god. They're not all the Anunnaki. There are other groups. Even when you look at something like Norse mythology, they talk about 9 different planets with 9 different groups of people. I'm going to use people to even describe the aliens, the extraterrestrials, living on them. And it's interesting because when you read mythology, man is a footnote and really at the very end of the story in the history of this planet.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about the mythology. Now, I know that I've had some pretty hardcore Christian friends, in my life who really believe that aliens are fallen angels. And there's all these different ideas of who God is, what God is, and, of course, then there's a lot of the New Age stuff that's floating around as well. So, I would say I don't think God came and purposely put in all these different Bibles and different ideas. I think that he would have wanted everybody to share the same idea, the truth. So, where do we go from there? I mean, what type of mythologies have you found to really stick, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask.
Well, and my belief is that all of the stories that come down to us and all of the religions that come down to us all come from a single root. And the names have changed and the stories have been mixed around, but if you just take them in their entirety, they really all tell the same story. Now, in some of them, pieces are missing, or different groups of gods are combined into one god. So take Christianity, for example. They take all of the gods and put that into one god, and then you have the devil, who in mythology of every other culture has a lord of the underworld. But they also have a god who is usually associated with creation of man and teaching of man as being a trickster. And I think that god category mixed with the god of the underworld became the devil, even though in Christianity it's not a god. Did that make sense?
Okay. It does. It does. And I'll be honest, I'm not a Bible scholar. I don't know as much as some people do about, all the stories in the Bible, the different religious texts. But I think I know enough to get me by at least. But so would you, all these stories that go back in the Bible and even the Sumerian texts and others, do you feel like these stories are accurate? They're telling a story of our past and what might have gone on here?
Yes, very much so. And I think when you start taking, more than just the Bible, more than just the Sumerian text, and start putting them next to each other, they give you a bigger picture or more possibilities as to what the real story is, because each of the different cultural groups, the stories are all kind of tainted to fit their cultural bias, some more than others. And so it gives you a different perspective. For example, one of the early groups of gods, and I'm going to use the Greek example because I think more people are familiar with this, is the god Uranus, who was one of the progenitor gods. He is one of the original gods to come to this planet. And so according to Greek mythology, Uranus had a son, Kronos. Well, Kronos was associated with fertility. However, when you look at myths from other cultures, the gods of fertilities were really a different cultural group. They were a different race, so it gets kind of interesting. But in Greek mythology, Kronos castrates Uranus, and takes over. And so as you look at the mythology, there are all these warring groups of gods fighting for control. One of the things that people ask me, I thought that God's supposed to be loving and kind, And
yeah, that's the biggest question you hear when we talk about God is I'll have people always say, well, if there's a God, why does this happen? Why does that happen? Why doesn't he stop this and why doesn't he stop that? And, so you're right.
And it's interesting because one of the things that we put out in the book is that we as individuals have a belief that there is an ultimate creator God, whatever that might be. I mean, we're here somehow, and I don't just mean the earth and humans, I mean the universe exists. And that God is outside of our understanding, whether it is a person, a level of energy, a form of consciousness, a vibration, whatever that is, we do not try to define it, and it's probably outside of our ability to truly know what that is. However, there's a big however. When you look at mythology, that's not the God we're talking about. I mean, even though many indigenous cultures believe in the big G God, they believe in whatever that is, and when they talk about the gods that they interact with, that's not who they're talking about. I joke around and say, well, if you're God, you should be able to wiggle your nose or blink your eyes or wave a wand and have things appear. You should be able to transport instantaneously to different places. You should be able to do anything at your whim because you're God. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be a godlike quality?
Absolutely.
But you don't find that. In mythology. The gods had weapons. The gods had chariots. They had houses. The home of the gods could move around and fly. They could go under the water. There is nothing omnipotent about these characters. They could even die.
Yeah, and I've said it several times myself that if you went back, 1,000, 1,500 years or even further, and had a helicopter and flew over these people, they would have thought you were a god. So. Mm-hmm. I would imagine that if we were visited by extraterrestrials back when, that's the first thing they would have thought is, hey, the gods are here.
Mhm. I mean, if in the next 100 years we create the ability or have the ability to, do interplanetary travel, I think that many of the things that we have even today to a, primitive or indigenous population, that's what they would think, is that we were gods, because we could do these things that they couldn't even imagine.
Right. And I've always said when people say, oh, who do you think or what do you think God is? And my only answer could be the universe. What else could it possibly be? It's so big that you can't see it. You can't understand it. It's, to me, that would be God. But, because everything is put in so intelligently. It's like everything supports everything else. It's like a very intelligent puzzle put together. So that leads me to believe, somebody was behind, or something, or some great power was behind everything we know to exist.
And that's what I call that big G God. versus the gods that we meet in mythology, because they did not have that ability. Now, they did a lot of stuff. I mean, I think they did terraforming. I think they did genetic engineering. Actually, I'm pretty much positive they did genetic engineering. One of my favorite pieces that I found out was in talking about the concept of heaven. And most people think, well, heaven's this place up there. But in most other cultures, heaven is mostly identified as being the home of the gods, or where the gods live, which our understanding in a Western, more Christian model, heaven is where God lives. Except when you look at it from a Greek perspective, Olympus, the home of the gods, is beyond the reach of the birds, and it's so far out that you can't get to it. When you look at it in the Indian cosmology, this one was my favorite, the homes of the gods were actually, they give you descriptions of how big they are. And so the smallest one, it was huge. It is not the, I'm just trying to get the size in front of me. Hang on, because it was...
Oh, that's okay.
Anyway, basically this thing, the smallest one was like 100 by 75 miles wide. It was huge. And that was the smallest one. And it just brought to my mind, kind of like, the big galaxy cruisers in Star Wars, where Darth Vader was hanging out. Because they're huge. We can't even imagine. Okay, so the smallest one, okay, I found it. The smallest one was 500 miles in length by 350 miles in width.
Wow, that's huge.
And that's the smallest
that's huge.
one. The other ones were bigger.
Yeah, that's huge for a small one. It kind of reminds me of the Phoenix Lights kind of deal that people describe seeing this huge craft just floating over the city. And, it's amazing stuff.
But, but something that big would almost be, as big as Texas. It would be bigger than some states. Definitely bigger than Rhode Island.
Wow, where do they build something like that? That's just
not
unbelievable. So now, what do you think about, I guess, with alien life, then you would probably say that the ultimate creator, God, created all life throughout the universe then, right?
Correct. That would be my belief, or set up the situation that happened. But what the gods that were here, what their relationship to the big G God, that universal God, was, who knows?
Right. And, I'm a little curious, did they call themselves gods, or did the people just assume they were gods?
Well, it's a very interesting dynamic. Just looking at it from kind of a sociological point of view, and I'm sure you've heard people, even on your show, talk about how humans were created to be a slave species.
Yeah, I don't really buy that, but yeah, I've heard it.
But you've heard that, but one of the things, there is this one gentleman who wrote this book called The Races of Man, and his comment got me stirring. And his comment said that mankind was the ultimate domesticated species. Not slave, domesticated. Which really puts it in kind of a different category. And if you look at humanity and where we are and who we are, we really truly are domesticated. We're domesticated to work. We've been taught and trained and put into situations and put into cities and live by a code of morality that's been imposed on us by somebody else. and that somebody else is the gods.
Well, no, I can't argue with that. And, that is, it's just, I've had some tell me, well, the Anunnaki put us here and created us to mine their gold and for whatever other reasons. And I just, I thought, yeah, we kind of are slaves and we do work for the system. But at the same time, I'm not so sure that Anunnaki created us for that. I mean, I think there's enough evidence to say that there was giants here too. And, you trying to put all the pieces together is just, I don't know if we'll ever get all the answers.
Well, this is what I found, is that, one, I don't believe that the Anunnaki were the only ones here. I'm just going to put that out. I mean, I think they were a group, but I don't think they were the only ones here. The giants, it's interesting. The stories that come through, the giants kind of come into the story a little late in the game. The way mythology reads is that they were actually a race created by the gods on Earth. And so they preceded man. And the way the mythology reads is that the giants got tired of doing the work. And this is not just from the Sumerian text, because they were the children of the gods, and so why should they work so hard? And so mankind was created to pick up that load. What's interesting is I just found, I'm working on an article as we speak, about this bridge that was found off the coast of India that connects India to Sri Lanka. And it's called Rama's Bridge. And so many people believed, and I'm going to put believed, that this was a natural kind of sand reef barrier that separated these two water areas, two different gulfs. However, tradition said that this was the bridge that was made by Rama, which is documented in the Ramayana. And when you start digging around into the mythology and then comparing that to the geological aspects as well as the anthropological aspects, it all fits. It all makes sense. But you have to bring a lot of different pieces together to have it be cohesive.
It does really make sense. And, we cover a lot of different stuff on this program, and I've had people say, well, what does UFOs or aliens have to do with what's going on now? And I always answer, well, for all you know, it could have a lot to do with what's going on now. Who knows? Maybe they're still amongst us now. Maybe they're actually controlling things and we don't know it. So there's a lot to it. And then you look back, caves that had drawings of these beings and these crafts. I mean, you would think that way back when they would have had to have seen this stuff in order to draw it. Then you find these little artifacts, these little airplanes that were made and little spacemen and all this stuff that was crafted. You got to wonder, well, where would they get these ideas from unless they've seen this kind of stuff?
Mhm. Today we borrow stories from mythology and put a modern spin on them. But it's something that we've heard the stories and make it be contemporary. For those people, like in the Ramayana, and I'm going to stick with that narrative for a minute, they didn't have flying ships with, missiles on them and lasers and all kinds of weaponry to basically knock each other out of the sky, and to do the kind of devastation that they did with this equipment. They didn't have giants. I mean, they might, if you read the story, where would they get this material? Why would they think that there are these machines that could fly in the sky? Why would they think that there would be these races of giants that could change form, and shapeshift? But there's stories of shape-shifting gods around the world.
Yeah, there is. And I would guess the reason they come up with this stuff is because they've seen it with their own eyes, maybe.
Well, that's my thought.
Yeah.
When you end up with a overabundance and overprevalence of commonality, you have to think that there might be some kind of truth to what they're talking about. Can I give an example?
Sure, please do.
You know, one of my favorites. Okay, in looking at the commonality and the threads that run through, you know, if it was a Sumerian story that had filtered into the Greek culture, you know what I mean? Proximity-wise, it's pretty close. You know, if it ends up in Egypt, pretty close. But when it starts shifting out into other geographic areas that are not even remotely next to each other, then you really have to start asking the question. And so I'm sure you're familiar with the mythological character Thor, you know, like they made the movie of. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so Thor's weapon is the hammer. And in some cultures, or, you know, sometimes it's the hammer or the club or the axe, you know, but that's under that hammer. And so with that weapon, if he throws it, other than destroying whatever it hits, it will come back to him automatically. Okay, so that's the characteristic of this weapon. In Australia, they have what's called the boomerang, or we know it as the boomerang. And as we all know, a boomerang is a weapon that once you throw it, it should, I mean, unless I threw it, it should come back to you so you can catch it. And there is a story about the Wakari brothers. And they went, and there was this other god. Let me throw this in. So the Wakari brothers were these half-man, half-lizard characters. And so there was another god who was trying to have sex with the women on the earth. And so one of the brothers castrated this god, and he ended up going into a water hole. Okay, but so they used this boomerang to castrate this god for wanting to have sexual relations with the women on the earth. Back in Greece, we have Uranus, who we talked about a little bit, who was castrated by his son using a sickle. Now, a sickle, in my opinion, looks a lot like a boomerang. And then in Sumerian culture, the sickle was Enlil's weapon without reveal. You know what I mean? It was the ultimate weapon.
Right.
You know, and so you find, you know, the same weapons, the same stories all over. You know, and one of the things that I always ask is if I said to you, well, make up a story of how, you know, you ended up starting your radio show. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? You know, like the creation. Tell me the story of creation of your radio show. And then if you asked me, I have a radio show too. Tell me the story of the creation of your radio show. Our stories would be totally different.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, if we were sitting at a big table with maybe 15 people and one of us whispered our story into the next person's ear and asked them to pass it down, that story would probably change 6 or 7 times.
I mean, in that circumstance, you know, that whole telephone thing, you know, it does change. But there would be big differences between a creation story that you get out of Australia or you get out of South America and you would expect to get out of the Middle East. I mean, you would expect that, but that's not what you find. You find a level of consistency with the characteristics of the gods as well as the stories that they tell of these gods.
Absolutely. Okay, let's take a break here. And, Doctor, before we take our first call tonight, now let me ask you this. Why do you think the people are having so many sightings now? I mean, do you think that it's the same aliens from maybe thousands of years ago that are still keeping tabs on us? What do you think they want? What do you think they're doing here?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I'm seeing, let me just put out, I'm not a contemporary ufologist, so I'm just a little talking out my butt here. But
I
one of the things
understand.
that
Me too.
I'm seeing, one of the things that I'm seeing is a level of control that is being put over society. You know, whether we're talking the Patriot Act or whether we're talking about, you know, early childhood inoculations, you know, good, bad, or indifferent, although they always seem not good for humanity in the general sense of the word. You know, if you relate with regular people, it's like people want to like each other. People want to get along. People want to experience harmony. That's just human nature. And the things that are going on around us are all about greed and for themselves and control and power. And you see that kind of behavior coming from these extraterrestrial groups. And so whether they've left, I mean, I don't think they've left. I think they've stepped into the background because we became more aware of them and they wanted to give us free rein. But I think, you know, if they were going to pick a time to come back in and take control again, this would be a pretty operative time to do that because we, from a technological perspective, I think are catching up to where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're on the hitting on topics like this, have you heard about the story that's been going around about China and the United States at war with these UFOs? And if you have, any comments on that?
I have not heard that. And I'm a pretty big internet junkie, and I haven't heard that one. That's a little bit surprising.
Going around, and I know that Project Camelot had covered it as well, and the story goes that these UFOs are being fought off the coast of San Francisco and off the coast in China somewhere. And, you know, I have a friend and a host of one of the shows on our network who lives in China, and he couldn't confirm any of it. And I tend to think it's one of those stories that is just being put out there. But then, you know, you got to wonder, we hear about this false ET invasion that the New World Order would pull out of desperation. And you got to wonder if these stories go around just to see how many people will buy into it. So I don't know. I was just curious if you had heard of it.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I see running rampant, you know, kind of talking about the powers that be, one of the things that I see running rampant are stories to keep us in fear. You know, so whether it's the GMOs, whether it's what's going on in the Middle East, whether it's, you know, fear about our security in the United States, whether it's fear about swine flu. I mean, it's like every other day there is something that comes out or hits the news or hits the background news that wants to keep everybody in fear. And when people are in fear, they can't think correctly, and they're much more easily guided and directed as opposed to being self-directing. And that's the part that scares me the most.
And it is scary, and people, you know, like the mainstream media is full of fear-mongering. And we see it in the alternative news a lot, too, as well. And like you said, it goes from everything from World War III, in which we've talked about that, but, you know, because some of these things are a possibility. But, I mean, there's some out there who are saying this is happening, you know, and they do. They try to pull the fear on you, just like they did with, you know, the threat of terrorism. And, this Patriot Act's to protect you. The TSA is here to protect you. And, you know, and people get feared into accepting that. They say, yeah, well, hey, you know, I don't want to get blown up by a terrorist. So, sure, you know, that's okay with me. And, you know, little by little, it seems like our rights, our freedoms, they are being taken away from us. And we're pretty much giving them away because we're falling into the fear factor.
Well, I mean, we fall into the fear factor, but we kind of don't get a choice either. They just decide stuff. Right. I mean, I went to Sacramento for a conference and, you know, to speak of, and it was my first time going to the airport that had the full body scanners in it.
Yeah.
And I actually went through the scanner for the experience of it, and I will never do it again. Ever. Because it was so invasive. I mean, excuse the way that this comes out, but it is less uncomfortable going to the gynecologist than it was going through that thing.
Oh, I bet you. You know, and these scanners, they do put radiation in people's bodies. And you think of somebody who flies maybe, you know, every day of the week. One of those, even, you know, I don't know, whoever that might be, but they have to go through these things constantly. And I believe you have a choice, right? You could either go through the scanner or you
Correct.
can get felt up.
The Pat Man.
Yeah, the Pat.
Yeah, rope.
All right, let's take a call. We actually got a couple calls we'll take, and then we'll get back into some conversation here. Thomas in Texas, you are on Late Night in the Midlands. Welcome aboard.
Yes, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to speak in a conceptual manner and see if the doctor agreed with me, had any thoughts on what I was saying. If you took all the religions and belief systems on this planet and rolled them into one, you'd be closer to factuality than anybody is right now. How does that statement stand with you?
It does. I mean, one of the things that I heard years and years and years ago was that there's only one God and many paths to him. You know, and I think that religions, you know, if you're starting out with one base idea, you know, and then bringing it forward, I mean, I think that different groups at different times, you know, broke off and they created their own faction, and this group created their own faction. I mean, one of the things that even makes me laugh is that in Christianity, I mean, you have your Roman Catholics and then you have all of your Protestant faith. And I'll tell you what, you know, you can't get two Baptist groups to, like, agree with each other. You know, and they believe in the same God, technically speaking, which I personally don't understand. You know, but my belief is that, you know, the whole purpose of religion in the first place, and you know, please don't stone me for this, or is because we were subservient to these gods. You know, and so it was something that they wanted. They wanted us to venerate them. They wanted us to worship them. However, when we look at worship in a contemporary meaning, you know, we think about going to church, and we think about saying a little prayer, you know, an Our Father or Hail Mary. But that's not how the context was in ancient times. In ancient times, it was to be subservient. It was to bow down and surrender to their will. That's what they wanted from us. And that has gotten so distorted throughout the years and throughout all of the dogma that I think, you know, the truth of who we are and our relationship to these beings has been totally lost.
Yes. And also, I was listening earlier in the conversation. Giants were mentioned, and I'm 6'7" tall, and I can tell you from my own experience, I have seen what you would call a giant. I've had dealings with the Sasquatch people for the last 4.5 years here in Texas, and being as tall as I am, I never thought that I would see a man that could literally call me midget, but I would say he's somewhere between 11 and 12 feet tall, and that might constitute a giant.
Well, I mean, it is very clear from mythology that giants existed. Very clear. You know, even, and I'm sorry I keep going back to Greek, you know, but in Greek mythology, the giants were created from the blood of the castrated Uranus. You know, and I believe that a group of giants were created, and I'm using that word specifically, created, you know, genetically engineered and lived on this planet prior to the creation of man. And they had lived here for exceptionally long periods of time until finally mankind was created. And according to many of the myths, mankind was actually created from the blood or the bones of the giants, or from an indigenous population that was here on the planet, and the DNA of the gods. You kind of get two different versions. A little hard to separate. And it doesn't mean that they're both not true. So.
Yeah, I've had to come to quite a few realizations myself along the way, so I just thought I would add to your conversation a little bit with some conceptual ideas and some of my own experiences. But, yeah, it's interesting to see the things that everybody is going through and doing down here, and we're just going to have to wait to the end of the play or the drama to see everything that's going to unfold.
Okay.
All right, thank you for taking my call.
All right, Thomas, thank you so much for your call. And, I wondered, Doctor, I've had some Bigfoot-type experts on this program, and I always try to ask them, do they think that Bigfoot could be associated in any way with the UFO phenomena? And, most have not agreed with that. They don't think so. But, we hear about these Sasquatch creatures, and apparently they're there 1 minute they're there, and then they just vanish. They're gone. So there could be a beam me up Scotty.
Well, actually, my belief is that the Sasquatch creatures are actually more associated with the giants.
Mm-hmm.
There were descriptions of giants as being hairy and furry, and there were also descriptions of these same characters being able to shapeshift. So maybe they disappeared because they just shifted into some other form or made themselves appear, like a tree, or I don't know, whatever they might do to be undetectable.
Yeah, that makes sense. But, for somebody who doesn't really think about this stuff and they hear this and they're thinking, come on, people can't do that. But, maybe we can't because,
we're not
they
talking
talk about
people.
Yeah, exactly. and that's what I try to do, get people to think outside of the realm. Just because something may not be possible in our reality doesn't mean that it's not, different somewhere else. Scientists have discovered life in places on this planet where they always thought there shouldn't be. So who's to say, what's what? I think it's just a drop in the bucket what we know right now. And boy, would I love to have all the answers. I really would. Let's bring Tommy on in Connecticut. Tommy, thank you for listening. You're on Late Night in the Midlands.
Yeah, how you doing? Hey, listen, I got a question, Dr. Luis, okay, and it's got to do with religion and the extraterrestrials. And maybe if you're not an expert, I'm going to hang up and I could listen to what you have to say, your opinion. There was a whistleblower. Basically, Terry Cassidy had a whistleblower she interviewed about 5 years ago, and he was like Doug Dietrich. He, basically worked in some government library and destroyed records, and he saw some paperwork, and I might add that this guy was actually taken out a month after the interview, that the extraterrestrials, put Jesus on this earth and created the Bible for us to follow. Now, I have a hard time trying to understand this topic and what the real deal is. Do you think that the extraterrestrials, because Jesus was real, and he, there was a Jesus, and that whole stuff is all real. Did they put him here, or is it the other way around?
Interesting question, and I definitely have an answer. It might not be what you want to hear, but I'm just going to give you my answer. I personally believe that Jesus was a real, live, living, breathing person, although not everyone believes that Jesus was a real, live, living, breathing person. My feeling is that, Jesus hung out in the Galilee, but it wasn't until his teachings were picked up by Paul and moved into Roman culture and really kind of changed from the basic Jewish tradition to fit. I mean, it's kind of like we were talking about. It starts out as one thing, and he whispers it in the ear of the person next to him, and it becomes something else. But it wasn't until Paul took over that Christianity became something. And I think if that character hadn't discovered Christianity or converted to Christianity, that it would have just died on the vine, just like many of the other earlier traditions. Now, was there some intervention to help it spread, and to make it be more acceptable? I don't really know. Do I believe that Jesus, was put here to do something? No. I think his message was a big sell job.
Oh, okay, yeah, all right. Because I just this guy says he saw a document that the extraterrestrials created Jesus, and I just wanted to get your opinion, because that's basically, that's got me stumped. That religion thing's got me stumped, and I'll tell you what. I really do believe why the government, the main reason why there's no disclosure, and this guy Steve Bassett could scream his lungs out. There will never be disclosure, ever. And the reason being is, if there is disclosure, religion is going to, people are just going to, they're going to jump off a bridge. And the confusion and the hysteria that it will cause, in my opinion, forget about, our safety and, the Air Force and the Army want to protect us and national security interests. I think that's the main factor. I really, really do. And that's why I think the Vatican knows what the real deal is. Everybody does. And that's the reason. But anyway, hey, thanks for taking my call. And you're doing a good job there, Mike. Be good.
Well, thank you very much, Tommy. And great call, too. And, my take on it is I feel like religion was man-made. And it was designed to control and divide. Now, that's not to say that God, I'm not putting God down or Jesus or any of that. I believe there is a God. But I believe, God is of no religion. So I would have to say that religion was designed by man. Look at how it tells you if you do this or if you do that, you're going to go to hell. And then there's a part that people bring up often, because I have psychics who do come on this show. And I sometimes get emails from people saying, the psychics are evil, they're communicating with demons, and you're bringing hell onto your family by consulting in psychics and such. And I ask, well, how do we know that something wasn't thrown in there about that? Because maybe kings, queens, gods, whatever they were back then, didn't like the fact that the psychics knew what they were up to, or maybe exposing them to the people. And so they said, well, we better put this in so that they don't do that. It's just a theory. I'm not saying that's the case. But I don't dispute the stories in the Bible. But
and I think I agree with you. One of the things that I talk about in the book, Man, the Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods, is the fact that our laws and religion are part of our domestication. And so people that are murderers, people that are thieves are shunned by society, and they're pushed into being outcasts. And so those people that have the more violent tendencies, people that have more aggressive tendencies, people that have something that falls outside, this is how we want everyone to be, as, survival of the fittest, they don't get to reproduce. And so it changes the gene pool, by getting rid of the people that fall outside because they get stigmatized. And so it changes. There have been studies done where they have taken wolves and they've taken the tamest wolves and mated those together, and so out of that pack, if there was one that was aggressive, it was taken out. And within 12 generations, they had engineered a wolf that was showing all the signs of domestication, 12 generations, just by eliminating that aggressive factor and certain other factors that make them be antisocial. And that's what our religion does. It says this is how we're supposed to be in society, and this is how you are social, and you're supposed to love one another like yourself. And you know something, Michael? It's interesting because when we look at government and we look at corporations, you know, like Monsanto with their GMOs and stuff like that, you know, they're doing anything but loving us. You know, they're just killing us. And they know it, and they don't care.
You know, we're supposed to live by the rule, but, you know, they're the exception to those rules. They could do what they want. And you know, as far as that goes, the Bible, I think it's a wonderful guide on how to live your life. Sure, you know, you don't want to do harm to others. And, you know, thou shalt not kill. And, you know, that's all good. That is. But I think that it's the religions that take it and turn it into a control mechanism. And, you know, no doubt government's a big part of that.
But what's interesting is even concept, okay, and this isn't my belief, but I'm just kind of like stirring the pot here a little bit, but even the concept of thou shalt not kill, think about like Worf and the Klingons, you know, to die in battle is an honorable death. And in their culture, fighting to the death, there was honor in it. You know, and it was something you wanted to do because it was the sign of being a good Klingon. And that was where their programming was, where ours is not that way. You know, it is definitely something that is on the earth and not necessarily the possibility of the reality in other cultures, you know, in other galactic cultures.
Right. And, you know, and even here they make it seem like it's very honorable. Hey, you know, he died at war defending the country and this and that. And they make it honorable. But, you know, think about it. I mean, how many wars have there been in the name of religion, and how many people have died because of it? And, you know, these politicians want to quickly send our sons and daughters off to fight. And I say, if they want these wars so bad, why don't they send their kids first? You know, but they never do. And these are the same people who have run from wars and hid from being drafted in any wars. And they're so quick to send our family members for these wars. And they claim, you know, and it's, again, the fear factor. We have to go over there so they don't come here. And, you know, I don't know about you, but last time I checked, the Flintstones had to put their feet on the ground and move their vehicle. They weren't, you know, turning a key and hitting the gas pedal. So I'm not too worried about terrorists coming. I think that if we protect our borders and stop worrying about the borders all around the world, then we don't.
But we don't.
Put our nose in
we don't protect our borders, but if I want to fly from Texas to California or New York or anywhere, I have to be subjected to that machine. Now, I could see if you're making an international trip, you know, and you're leaving the country or coming into the country, that they would want to do some kind of scrutiny, you know, and I could see a certain amount of scrutiny, you know, in the United States. But to treat every human being in this country like you're a potential terrorist is wrong.
It is wrong. And, you know, they claim, oh, we're supposed to be so worried about terrorists, but yet, you know, we've got people running over our borders by the thousands every day, you know, and so, but we're supposed to be worried about terrorists, and we're treated like terrorists, and getting onto that flying deal. And now that people say, well, I'm not going to fly no more, now they want to put TSA in bus stations, and they're even talking about putting them on the interstates. You know, stop you when you cross a border into another state. I mean, it's getting ridiculous. It really is. It's getting
well, you know,
out of hand.
Since they've done all of this stuff and spent millions, if not billions of dollars implementing it, you know, there hasn't been one act of terrorism in the United States, you know, on an airline.
No, there hasn't. And I say the terrorists are actually wearing the suits and ties. That's what I think, the real terrorists. But not to say that there's not some real radical groups out there that would like to inflict some kind of harm to not only America but other countries. But not like it's portrayed to us in the news. They just lie so much. How can we believe anything they tell us? And, it is what it is, unfortunately. But, Doctor, we've got to take another break here. This is a shorter, and exactly where you're going with everything in the book, and where people can get their hands on it, a little more information about that.
Okay, so the book is not actually released yet. It is going to print next week. Yay.
Oh, okay.
Later in this week, next week. It's, dealing with publishers is a little bit of a roller coaster ride. But people can get information about it by going to, I have multiple websites. I set up one specifically for the book, which is called manmadethechronicles.com. Or they could go to my main website, which is soulhealer.com, SOULHEALER.com. Or if you type Rita Louise on this in a search engine, I'm everywhere. But one of the things we're doing is we are accepting pre-orders for books. Any book that is ordered via the pre-order process will be shipped for free and also come signed by myself as well as my co-author, Wayne LaLiberty.
Okay.
So I think that's a pretty good deal, as opposed to, waiting and then you have to pay the shipping and, and it doesn't come signed. And that's like priceless right there.
Exactly. So now you have a radio show, too. Tell me a little bit about your radio show and what kind of stuff you're covering there.
Okay. My radio show is called Just Energy Radio. It airs live on Friday afternoons from 2 to 4 p.m. We cover everything from alternative health through UFOs. One of my favorite topics, see, it sounds like you like talking about health and UFOs and conspiracy. We talk
Absolutely.
a lot about a lot of ancient mystery topics. But we cover everything. I try to have it be pretty well balanced as far as topics that we cover, and I'm not afraid to bring people on to talk about things that are kind of out there. Like around the Halloween time, we have a gentleman who is a vampire, quote unquote, coming on to the show. Hey, you know what I mean? They make up part of our population, and it's an area that people don't really know or understand. I sure didn't. I sure don't.
No.
So I try to create a platform for people to learn something, even if it's kind of falls outside the box.
I've gotten into the vampire topic a couple times, and I actually had a gentleman on, I don't know, it might have been almost 2 years ago now. Time just flies, but who talked about vampires and such. Now, in your experience, and even with this gentleman you were just talking about, are we talking about a Count Dracula type vampire? Or are we talking about what exactly is a modern vampire?
Well, my understanding of the vampire culture, there are the actual blood-drinking vampires, but then there are people that use it more as like a spiritual tradition, more about energy exchange. I don't believe that there are living dead, running around sucking blood because that's what they need to stay alive.
I was going to say you've never lived in Mansfield, Pennsylvania. You would swear that there's some living dead there.
Well, that might be the case, and I would have to watch my neck so that they don't bite me or anything. And then there's the whole concept of an energy vampire, which, I don't know that I would call them a vampire, although they might be. I'm not really trained in the whole vampire culture and law, which is one of the reasons why I have the guy coming on the show,
right.
So I can learn all about it. Because I think it's kind of fascinating that people are drawn to it. I mean, we've done a couple of shows about voodoo, you know, which most people have such a negative connotation for, and I've really come to appreciate it because it really is, you know, a form of spirituality and a form of ritual that, you know, on the surface we have such a negative connotation about it, but the practitioners of it are anything but evil. You know, I mean, in any spiritual tradition, you could have a, you know, an evil Christian. I mean, you know, it's not, doesn't have to do with your spiritual practice, you know.
I've met one of them.
Only one, huh?
So far, I've been fortunate enough to only have an encounter. Well, maybe two. But yeah, you're right. And, you know, that's pretty much what we do too. We get into all kinds of different stuff, and I tell people, you know, one night it might not be for you, and the next night it might. You know, because I have somebody who deals in the occult doesn't mean that I'm for all that I do it myself. I try to make it clear that, you know, we cover a lot of different stuff here, and just because my guest is into a certain area of things doesn't mean I am. I'm just trying to learn about it and maybe get into their head a little bit and see, you know, where all this comes from. So yeah, you know, we do it here too. I know I was going to have, there was actually a guy, I've had a guy on once who tried to convince us all that he was God. We've even gone that far. And, you know, and he was really exposed as a fraud. I mean, because obviously he was. But we almost had a guy on who claimed he was Satan. But the last network I was with just would not have it. They had a Christian belief and just was not going to let me go there, which I thought would have been interesting. I mean, I talked to the guy off the air, and he seemed like just a normal guy. And he's like, no, I don't believe that you go around killing people and this and that. And I just wanted to hear his perspective and why he thought that way. And that's about it. So yeah, we're not afraid to go anywhere too.
Mhm.
So yeah, now with this ancient alien theory, so then just to close cap on that, would you say that it's fair to say that, you know, when they talk about junk DNA that they find with the human beings now, would you say, could it be possible that it's not junk DNA and that it's actually ET DNA and they don't want to tell us about it, and that we could possibly have been put here? Maybe God created the life that created us.
I think that that's entirely possible. You know, I think that there is DNA from part of our, you know, and I'm going to say evolutionary process. I mean, I believe that the hand of God has been intervening with life on this planet since the first, you know, blue-green algae were here millions or billions of years ago, and that each big leap that we have achieved have been at the hand of the gods. You know, and I'm not a creationist. You know, I'm more of how did we go from not having eyes to eyes? Just boom. I mean, it's, you know, it just seems impossible unless there's some help happening. You know, and so I think that some of the DNA that we have might be remnants of our inheritance from all the way back then, too.
Right. And, you know, I kind of look at Earth as, I joke around about it sometimes, but I say, you know, we're probably this big sitcom for all the other space civilizations, and they watch us and they say, well, let's get a species from every corner of the universe and put it on one planet and see how they interact with each other. We got some weird looking stuff on this planet, I mean, when you think about it. So who knows? I know, you know, I don't believe in that that we came from apes, and I certainly don't believe that we were some fish, some type of sea creature that eventually grew legs and walked out of the ocean either. So I think there's a lot more to it than that. And, you know, I'll even go and theorize that possibly the dinosaurs were wiped off so we could be here. I don't know. But, you know, hopefully we'll get the answers. I don't know.
I mean, I personally think that, I'm just going to throw this in, that we were created from apes. I mean, I think that they had big hands in what was going on up until that point, and that there's a certain amount of evolution that has happened. One of the things that I get into a lot of detail in my book, Man-Made, is about the coincidences that all seem to come together, both mythologically, genetically, and culturally, all around the time of Homo erectus. So around 2 million years ago, 1.5 million years ago, and we go from being this hairy brute to being a upright, hairless, cultural, with tools being. And in my opinion, that is where man was, quote-unquote, created. That was where the infusion of DNA came in that made us, sentient, made us have consciousness that's separate from what we see in the animal world.
Right. Right. And when you talk to people getting into the paranormal realm just a little bit, when you talk to people who've had out-of-body experiences, such as myself, people who have had near-death experiences and things of that nature, for myself, having an out-of-body experience really helped me understand that we are more than just this physical being, and that, when this body dies, we're energy, and we're going to live on. We might change our form, but we're still going to be there somehow, some way. So, interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So, Doctor, if you would, one more time, give out your websites and where people can get the book again. And I want to thank you so much for being a guest on Late Night in the Midlands. It has been a very interesting conversation, to say the least. And maybe when the book does come out, when will it be out again, you said?
We're expecting... We got the final proof in. Here, I'll just spill the dirt. We got the final proof in, and we found a couple of, not able to overlook boo-boos. If it was a little boo-boo, we would have just said, okay, when you go to print again, we can incorporate these couple of little format things. But there were a couple of glaring problems that we couldn't overlook, so we have to go through that process again. And so we're expecting to be able to we're expecting that the books will go to print by the end of the week. So it'll be another week or so before we actually have them in hand.
Okay, great. So I was going to say, once the book comes out, maybe in the near future, we'd get you back on and talk more deeply. I'll be honest, I know you sent me a electronic copy in email, and I have not been able to read through it quite yet. So interested in reading that and then having you back on and really getting into it even more deeply.
Okay.
So
okay,
absolutely. I want
cool.
to thank you. Thank you very much for being on the show. And, websites, anything you want to get out there, by all means,
Sure.
Go right ahead.
The book is Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. You can pre-order a copy by going to Man-Made The Chronicles, so www.manmadethechronicles. And you can pre-order it, no shipping, signed by the authors. You can also purchase it at soulhealer.com, and that's my personal website, so you can find out about the other products and services that I offer. Or if you're interested in my radio show, that would be www.justenergyradio.com. Airs Friday afternoons from 2 to 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. And I'm all over the web.
Right.
You can find me on Facebook, all that good stuff.
Great. Well, Dr. Rita, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and looking forward to talking to you again in the near future. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you, Michael. All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a great night. And And with that, I'd like to welcome to Late Night in the Midlands, Dr. Rita Louise. Welcome aboard, Doctor.
Hey, Michael.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time out to be with us tonight. I do appreciate it.
Well, not a problem.
All right. Well, if we could, I guess let's start out a little bit. What got you so interested in this field, and tell me some about the book.
Okay. I mean, I've always been interested in ancient history, and, you know, my interest really kind of started off with as a child with an interest in archaeology, but as I move forward, I mean, the work that I do is I work as a psychic and a medical intuitive, and part of my, you know, that path really took me through looking at ancient spiritual traditions. And so, you know, I've always had this interest in, you know, mythology and how it relates to spirituality, and then, you know, history and looking at history from a different perspective, not from, you know, what the history books say, but from what the texts are actually trying to tell you, you know, from on a deeper level. And so that's really kind of what got me started in the concept of writing this book. You know, and there's been a lot of TV shows that talk about ancient mysteries and, you know, the whole Ancient Alien show, and that, you know, and we're talking about before the planet was really formed, or was in the process of being formed, a group of extraterrestrials came to the Earth. And when I say a group, it's kind of hard to tell if we're talking about an individual group that had other races or other phenotypes of characters that were subservient to them, or if there was an originating race and then there were usurping other groups from other planetary systems that in the mythology became their children, you know, became these associated groups, for good or bad, into this whole narrative of our history. But when you look at the mythology, you're really looking at 3 or 4 different characteristics and different genealogies of gods that come down to us.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
right.
And so they're not all the sky god. You know, they're not all the Anunnaki. There are other groups. Even when you look at something like Norse mythology, they talk about 9 different planets with 9 different groups of people. I'm going to use people to even describe the aliens, you know, the extraterrestrials, living on them. You know, and it's interesting because when you read mythology, man is a footnote and
getting right into it here. My guest tonight, Dr. Rita Louise, her book is Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. And we're going to talk about evidence of extraterrestrial contact tonight, amongst other things. PhD, best-selling author, medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise is the host of Just Energy Radio and the founder of the Institute of Applied Energetics. She is the author of 3 books as well as hundreds of articles that have been published worldwide. She has appeared on radio and television and has spoken at conferences covering topics such as health and healing, ghosts, intuition, ancient mysteries, and the paranormal. And she's going to be joining us in just a moment. I want to read a real short insert in her book, and I think it'll give you a really good idea of where we're going tonight. The one great question that says for humanity has always been, where do we come from? Great minds have wrestled with this since the dawn of consciousness, and various theories have been produced, some enduring and others not. Science has certain ideas and religions others. but none are conclusive nor universally accepted.
Really, at the very end of the story, in the history of this planet.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about the mythology. Now, I know that I've had some pretty hardcore Christian friends, in my life who really believe that aliens are fallen angels. And there's all these different ideas of who God is, what God is, and, of course, then there's a lot of the New Age stuff that's floating around as well. So, I would say I don't think God came and purposely put in all these different Bibles and different ideas. I think that he would have wanted everybody to share the same idea, the truth. So, where do we go from there? I mean, what type of mythologies have you found to really stick, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask.
Well, and my belief is that all of the stories that come down to us and all of the religions that come down to us all come from a single root. And the names have changed and the stories have been mixed around, but if you just take them in their entirety, they really all tell the same story. Now, in some of them, pieces are missing, or different groups of gods are combined into one god. So take Christianity, for example. They take all of the gods, and, that kind of spurred me on to dig a little deeper because I felt like they would give you glimpses into things and touch on things, but not necessarily give you the full answer. And I always want deeper answers and more understanding, and not just well, these guys said it too. It's like, okay, said what?
Right.
I want to know what they say, not that they just said it. So.
And so through your research and, looking so deep into this, what is your conclusion? I mean, the ancient aliens theory, I think, definitely holds some bearing, no doubt. There's just, and then there's the religious side of things. And I think more and more there's more evidence that is pointing towards some kind of extraterrestrial involvement at some point in our past.
Well, I mean, based on mythology, and the new book, Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods, really focuses just on mythology. And, my husband and I would get into he's the co-author. So I'm just going to say husband, Wayne LaLiberty, the co-author. He and I would get into these heavy conversations. He would, throw in the pyramids and throw in these structures. And it's like, I'm not talking about architecture. I'm just talking strictly about mythology because I feel like the mythology predates any of the architecture that we see on the planet. And based on the mythology, the way that it looks is that in our far remote past,